Welcome into our Math Essentials lesson on production. You are officially halfway done with Module 1. We're starting with something every food service operation deals with. How much of what you buy actually ends up on the plate? Now, be prepared. This lesson on production, particularly this first video on percent yield, is tricky. There are a lot of equations coming your way, but we've practiced the math skills you need to solve all these problems. Though in this video, to understand percent yield, you also need to understand the difference between the edible portion, the EP, as well as the as purchased portion, or AP. So let's start with edible portion. The edible portion is the amount of food you actually get to serve or eat after all of the cooking and trimming is done. So if you buy a whole bunch of carrots and then you peel and chop them, the carrots you use are the edible portion. It's what's usable after all the processing and prep, and it subtracts out the food scraps. The as purchased portion, or AP, is what you buy at the store or through a vendor before any prep, cooking, or waste happens. And we can relate these concepts to percent yield. It's the percent of usable food you get after processing or cooking. Both of these, the EP and the AP, can be thought of in terms of weight, so like pounds of carrot bought at the store versus pounds of carrot served after preparing them. To find percent yield when we know the total weight before and after processing the food, you divide the final weight, the EP weight, by the starting weight, the AP weight, and multiply it by 100. In my opinion, this equation makes sense. But we can also think about their cost, or their price per pound. The cost per pound at the store, also known as the AP cost per pound, is always lower than the cost per pound prepared. There is less remaining food, so the edible portion cost, the EP cost per pound, is always higher. So if we know the as purchased cost, the cost at the store, and we divide it by the EP cost, the increased cost given the food scraps during processing, and we multiply by 100%, we will also get the percent yield. Listen, we will take the time to make sure you get this concept and both of these equations. It's here in Module 1, but it's also tucked into Module 6 when we cover the food science on food processing, and it's in Module 9 on food service production. So in this video, we'll break down both of these equations using practice problems, starting with this weight equation that I think makes more sense. Then we'll talk about when to use each equation and how you can use one to solve for an unknown variable in another. Okay, so in this problem, we have a restaurant that buys 10 pounds of carrot. This is what I was talking about before with the carrots. These 10-pound carrots, that's what you buy at the store. Once they process them, they peel them, they trim them, they're left with 7 pounds of carrots. And they want us to solve for the percent yield. So the percent yield equation at its most basic is your edible portion weight divided by your as purchased portion's weight. And then you multiply that by 100. So we know that at the store, we bought 10 pounds of carrots. That's the purchase weight. We then peel them and we trim them, and so we're remaining with 7 pounds of carrots that are edible, that we can sell, that we can use in our recipes. So to find the percent yield, we would take 7 pounds, divide it by 10 pounds, and multiply by 100. We have a 70% yield here. Let's try something else. In this problem, instead of starting with how much we bought, we're given our target. And we're solving for our raw chicken. How much chicken do we actually need to buy at the store so that when we cook it and it has a percent yield of 80%, we're still left with 8 pounds. So we'll begin with the same percent yield formula. Percent yield is edible portion over as purchased multiplied by 100. And the percent yield is 80%. The edible portion is 8 pounds. And so we're solving for the as purchased amount. And now we need to do a little bit of algebra. Can you? To solve for as purchased, we would first need to divide both sides by 100%. It's implied that you have to divide by 100, but the algebra checks out. So we get 0.8 equaling 8 over AP. So to solve for AP, as purchased, we need to get it out of the denominator, meaning we have to multiply both sides by our as purchased variable. You could also call this X if you want to. And that gives us 0.8 times as purchased equals 8. But to solve for our as purchased, we have to undo that multiplication, meaning we have to divide both sides by 0.8. And we come up with as purchased being 10 pounds. We need to start with 10 pounds of raw chicken in order to produce 8 pounds of cooked usable chicken, assuming it has a percent yield of 80%. This reinforces how percent yield helps us plan how much we need to buy, and it shows how much of a difference trimming and cooking can make in real kitchen planning. Before we move on, I actually think it's worth our time to pause here and break this down, because this is one of the most important ideas in food service math, and it can definitely be confusing at first. So we already know two key terms. The as purchased weight is the weight of the goods that you start with from the grocery store or from the delivery. It's the full amount of food you buy before you trim it or cook it or clean it. That's compared to the edible portion weight or EP weight, which is what's actually usable for prep. This is the part of the food that you serve after you've trimmed it and cooked it. It's the ready-to-eat portion. What we're going to look at now are the costs, the as-purchased cost and the edible portion cost. So the as-purchased cost is what the supplier charges you. It's based on the full, raw, unprocessed weight, and it does not reflect what you'll actually be able to use. It's related to percent yield by this equation that I introduced a few slides ago. But in order to talk about that equation, we need to go over the EP cost. The cost of the edible portion, or EP cost, is what we really care about because it's the true cost of the usable food than the food that is ending up on the plate that we're serving. By doing a little bit of algebra to this equation down here, we can solve for the edible portion cost. We first divide both sides by 100, and then to isolate for the edible portion cost in the denominator, we have to multiply both sides by the edible portion cost and then divide both sides by the percent yield, which takes us to this equation right here. This equation is key because it gives you the real price of the food that you can actually serve. The cost of your prepared food is found by taking the cost of the wholesale food and dividing it by the percent yield. Now, your percent yield is always some number less than 100 when we're preparing food because we have some waste with our food. So maybe we have 80% yield, maybe we have 70% yield. Sometimes there's tons of waste, and so our percent yield goes down. When you divide by a number that's less than 100% or less than 1, your results get bigger. And so the less yield you have, the more you have to pay for every pound of food that you are able to then sell. So to be super clear here, your EP cost is always higher than your AP cost. EP cost is the cost that you are able to prepare your food for, and that is calculated by removing the waste products from your as-purchased food. So even though you bought the chicken for $1.99, by the time you process it and remove those bones, the edible cost will now be higher. It has to be higher when you're preparing foods. And that's because your edible portion weight is always lower than your as-purchased weight, because your as-purchased weight includes all of the waste that you'll be getting rid of. So now that this is hopefully clear, we can look at these two equations side by side. So percent yield is equal to your edible portion weight divided by your as purchased from the store weight times 100. And this equation is asking the question, how much of what we purchased is actually usable after we have prepared our food? And the more usable food you have, the higher proportion of edible portion weight or EP weight, then the higher our percent yield. This is called a direct relationship. They move in the same direction. The greater the weight for the edible portion after processing, then the greater your percent yield. The lower the weight you have after processing, the lower your EP weight, then the lower your percent yield. But the other equation for percent yield says if you take your cost, your as purchased cost per pound, and divide it by your edible portion cost per pound, you'll also get percent yield. This equation asks the question, what is the true cost per usable pound of food? On this side, we're comparing what we paid at the store to what each usable pound actually ends up costing. This is an inverse relationship. And what I mean by that is that these variables move in opposite direction. If your percent yield goes down, that's because you've lost a lot of the food due to trimming or bones or waste. You're getting less usable food per dollar. So your EP cost per pound goes up. If your percent yield is high, that means your EP cost is lower because you're using more of what you paid for. It's all about value and waste. How much are you really getting for your money? So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to summarize here is that percent yield is a measurement of efficiency. If your percent yield is higher, that means that you have less waste, and so you have more usable food. And that leads to a lower EP cost per pound because you just had more food at the end of the day. If the percent yield goes down, that means more waste and less usable food, which drives up your edible portion cost per pound, which is not so great for your food budget. And this concept ties directly into real-world food service, forecasting food cost, reducing waste, and pricing correctly. So with that, we're going to try one last example problem together. In this problem, we're told that we have a chef who buys 20 pounds of raw turkey, and that turkey costs him 79 cents per pound. So that's at the grocery store, or in the ordering for the restaurants. These are the as-purchased amounts. After cooking them, deboning and slicing, we're left with only 13.4 pounds remaining, so we lost quite a bit in our processing, and we're trying to figure out the edible portion cost per pound. Well, there's two equations to know here about percent yield. Percent yield is equal to the edible portion weight divided by the as-purchased weight, and we have both of these values. But also percent yield is equal to your as-purchased cost per pound divided by your edible portion cost per pound. This isn't so helpful right at the start of the problem, but we will need that equation as well. So just looking at this, right, at the store, we buy 20 pounds of raw turkey, and we only end up with 13.4 pounds. So we can solve for percent yield using our weights. We have a 67% yield. And the problem never asked for percent yield. It always asked for the edible portion cost. So we're really looking for this thing on the bottom right here. And we can take this equation that I told you we would use and do a little bit of algebra and rearrange to solve for the edible portion cost. The edible portion cost is equal to the as portion cost over the percent yield. And we get this equation right here just from doing a little bit of algebra with this equation on that side. And then once we understand this equation, we can just plug in because we know our percent yield is 67% and we know the as purchase cost per pound. It was 79 cents per pound. So if you take the cost per pound of 79 cents per pound and you divide it by your percent yield of 67%, you'll be able to find out how much the processed food now costs you. If it was 79 cents per pound, but you only got 67% out of that food, it's going to cost you more. It costs you $1.18 per pound. And that's the real cost per usable pound of turkey that the chef can actually serve. So just to recap, we used percent yield to adjust the raw cost and then calculate the true serving cost. The more we lose during cooking, the lower the percent yield, and so the higher the EP cost. I'm hopeful that this is feeling clear to you. Let's keep going.